Okay, this is lovely Janelia Research Campus. This is the view that most of you never get to see because it's not easy to see us. We're located just off of Highway 7 near One Loudon, and sometimes you can see our hotels, which are, sorry, our apartments, which are off in the left-hand corner. I used to live in one of those and just recently moved to Sterling. But in front of you is two buildings, the landscape building and the hotel building. We have guests from around the world that come to Janelia for conferences and also come to Janelia to do research with us. And they often stay in the guest house. And that building that's next to the pond in the further background, that is our landscape building. That is where we have all of our scientific labs and do all of our cool research. Let's go to the next slide. So Janelia Research Campus is owned and operated by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. If any of you have watched The Aviator with Leo DiCaprio, that's who Howard Hughes is. No, it is true. He actually got started in the movie business. And then years ago, back in the 1950s, he was fabulously wealthy because of his inventions for aeronautics, as well as he was very successful with movies. And he started a biomedical foundation. And that biomedical foundation was originally used as a tax haven, and the IRS came after him and he got in a lot of trouble. Fortunately for us, he then turned it into a real research foundation, and we are the beneficiaries and now have a $26 billion endowment to do research. Up until recently, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute was not a centralized group of researchers. Rather, the HHMI funded researchers around the country at different universities. Recently, back in 2003, it was decided that we would actually have our first centralized research campus. The goal of Janelia is to basically identify important biomedical problems that require technological innovations, large amounts of collaboration to be able to break through existing barriers. Next slide, please. So our philosophy is that we're internally funded. We have that large endowment, so we are not actually, we do not allow our researchers to write grants. So they are freed up in their time to focus on research. They don't have teaching obligations. We're not a university. They just get to spend their time doing research, and we provide them with lots of resources. We work on very big questions, long-range projects. We've just completed one of our big long-range projects, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. Basically, we're not interested in, like, it has to be done in the next year or two. We're interested in problems that may take 10 or 15 years to solve. Our labs are small. We do not run basic scientific labs that are 20 or 60 people, which can exist at some universities. Our labs are small enough that our researchers can actually still do research at the bench, which is really cool because you spend all of your life training to become a scientist, and by the time you become a professor or an investigator, you then spend a lot more time writing papers and writing grants and aren't doing the thing that you actually trained up to do. So our researchers get to continue doing research. It is a highly collaborative environment. People use that word a lot, collaborative, but we're actually designed to be collaborative, and I could talk more about that if people are interested. We share resources. Because we have large amounts of funds, nobody is limited in what they can do, and so there's a lot of sharing that goes on with data, with tools, with researchers from different labs. We also have project teams, which are a bit like having our own biotech companies within our institute, and they are dedicated to optimizing certain things, much like an industrial partner might do. Okay, next slide. So the research areas that we work in are neuroscience. We do some cell and developmental biology, a lot of computation and theory. There are some people doing some basic math, and we also have chemical biology, biotechnology, and engineering, and we are gearing up for a new research direction, which will be a focus of how cells communicate across tissues within a whole organism. Next slide. Our institute is also dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize the importance of having varying perspectives of people who come from different races, ethnicities, genders, training, and socioeconomic backgrounds to help us come up with all of the potential views that will help us push forward in difficult problems that we're working on. Next slide. So here's an example of one of the different kinds of projects that we work on. We have something called the Genie team. And what they're doing is they're trying to develop new kinds of tools that enable neurons to communicate with each other. And specifically what they're trying to develop are what we call biosensors. They are proteins that change shape and the amount of light that they produce depending on whether they are active or inactive. And so they're a way to tell whether a neuron is firing or whether a neuron has received glutamate or another neurochemical that actually changes the activity level of a neuron. And there's a large number of people in different groups that all come together to work on optimizing these reporters. Next slide, please. So what are these kinds of probes that we're making? So we're making what are called G-camps. These are sensors that detect calcium. This is a way to detect firing of neurons. We're making red G-camps, calcium sensors. And that's because it turns out that there's less interference from tissue when we go to longer wavelengths of light so that we can look deeper into a brain. Glutamate sensors for looking at neuropeptides. Calcium integrators, which actually tell us which cells were active when we sacrifice an animal. We want to look at what pathway was activated. GABA sensors, acetylcholine sensors, dopamine sensors, those are looking for different neuropeptides. And then we've created some of the most powerful to date voltage sensors, which more directly look at neural activity. And we've also created microscopes that allow us to look at neural activity, which is on the order of milliseconds. Next slide. This is an example of some of the dyes that we've created. We have chemists at Janelia that have created a whole new class of dyes that we creatively have called Janelia floors. And this is an example below of a zebrafish that has been lit up by one of these Janelia floors binding to a protein that we have designed that can bind to that Janelia dye. And so you can see the eyes and you can see several of the neurons throughout this fish. Next slide, please. We also have a project called Flylite, where we were looking at the adult fly brain. This is one of the neuroscience projects that we're working on. And you may say, wait a minute, Eric, neuroscience is obviously important. Why aren't you looking at human brains? Well, human brains are really cool, but they're also very complicated. Like there's maybe 40 billion neurons. And also it's difficult to do research on humans. We get in a lot of trouble if we try to do that. Flies are not complaining. And flies have a much smaller brain on the order of 100,000 neurons. And flies do a lot of surprisingly complex behaviors. And so what we've been interested in doing is actually figuring out how a fly brain works in hopes of getting insights into how brains work in general and being able to apply those principles to vertebrates and larger animals. So one of the tools that we need to be able to study the behavior of a brain is to be able to label individual neurons in the brain. Again, with 100,000 neurons, that sounds like a lot of neurons, but that's actually a tractable number. We've developed ways to genetically tag individual neurons so that we can have a neuron that will light up just because we are expressing green fluorescent protein, or a neuron that we can activate or inactivate using something called a sensor that will a channel that will actually prevent or enable calcium to flow into the neuron to activate it. So we can turn neurons on and off selectively. So one of our projects is called Flylite, that's actually developed these different lines of flies that have the capability of just having expression in one individual or two individual neurons. We've created all these different fly lines, way more than just 7,000 at the top. That's an old slide. And we currently maintain a stock of over 15,000 flies at Janelia. Next slide, please. And then most recently, we are very proud of having completed the Electron Micrograph 4 nanometer resolution map of the fly brain using electron microscopy. These are just a couple of slides showing in the upper at the top, you can see some of the different components of a fly brain. It's not just a wad of neurons. It's actually got structure, much like our own brain has structures in different regions. To the left, you can actually see slices of a brain that appear in an electron micrograph using a transmission electron microscope. And then to the right, you can see all of those images have been recombined into large 3D volumes in combination with our computation and theory group. We have a number of people doing cutting edge machine learning and computer vision research to help us with our models of the brain to be able to trace the individual neurons to see how everything's interconnected and then make predictions about how things might work. Next slide, please. And then here's an example of a specific structure in the fly brain. This is something called the central complex. And this is important for navigation. It allows flies to determine their direction that they're going to move into. They don't just do it randomly, they actually do it with intent and purpose. And the really cool thing that's going on here is that that donut-shaped structure is much like a compass. And literally, with our probes that I told you about a few minutes ago, we can see parts of the brain light up when the fly is going in different directions. And what happens is the direction is the same on that donut structure. If the fly is going left, you see lighting up in the upper left-hand corner. Or if the fly turns, you see this wave of neural activity move over to the right. And that's probably much easier than anybody expected it would work, but that is the solution that flies have come up with. And so we have people that are working actively on this complex. And then below is just a picture of some of the different, a slice through the neurons of the brain so that you can see that it's packed with so many different neurons. Again, 100,000. Next slide, please. And literally last week, this story was featured as the lead story in the New York Times science section. I encourage you to go there and learn about the fly brain and how we are now utilizing that to learn about how brains work. It was a really nice article and basically showed off one of the really cool things that we've managed to accomplish at Janelia. Next slide, please. We're doing a new series of projects that we're calling 4D cell physiology. And so what we're trying to do is actually figure out how cells work at the molecular level, at the organelle level, at the individual cell level, at the tissue level, and the whole body level to communicate with each other across all these different scales. The image that you see above is again, a transmission electron microscope image of a cell, a cross section. You can see that dark circle, that oval is the nucleus, and then you can see the plasma membrane. What's really cool below, again, that's efforts by our computation and theory team to actually individually assign and identify which are the mitochondria, what is the nucleus, what are structures coming off of the plasma membrane, so that we can do this in an automated fashion rather than having tracers try and go through and identify individual structures. And this basically saves us hundreds of thousands of man-person or person hours to be able to have a sense of how these things can work all together. Previously, something like this would have been impossible without the computational power and machine learning tools that we're using at Janelia. Next slide, please. In 2015, we had the first Janelia Loudoun County High School internship. And I'm showing pictures here of a couple of the different groups that have worked at our institute over the summer, and some pictures of the end of summer symposium to give you a sense of the kinds of projects that the students got a chance to work on. And they are all computational by nature. We do not let students under 18 work at the bench, so you don't get to solder anything, you don't get to work with cool cells or anything like that. I'm sorry, but that's just our rules. However, the computational projects are pretty cool. Next slide, please. So what exactly does our internship involve? It is open to Loudoun County residents that are age 16 and older. You must live in Loudoun County. You do not apply to me. You apply through the Loudoun County Public Schools application process. You will actually get an email from Loudoun County Public Schools saying that there is an application available and you can fill out that application and enter the competition. We usually receive around 100 to 150 applications a year. As I mentioned, the projects are explicitly computational. The projects are 8 weeks. It is a paid internship. We do not actually have volunteer positions available at Janelia. So please, after you see this presentation, don't reach out to any Janelia group leaders and say that you want to go work in their lab for the summer as a volunteer. That is not possible. I'm sorry. And you also cannot do a capstone project at Janelia. That is not an option. As an intern, you get to attend seminars, you get to attend journal clubs. Sometimes we have courses. We've had courses on machine learning and math of machine learning at Janelia. And then we also have speakers from around the world that come that talk about neuroscience, about computer science, computer theory, about cell biology, about microscopy, about engineering. There are no specific requirements for the internship itself, but our strongest applicants have an emphasis on math and coding training, especially in coursework and as well as direct experience. We're looking especially for students that have experience programming in Python, MATLAB, and R, or. And if you have had an opportunity to take machine learning, linear algebra, statistics, and multivariate calculus, those can also be helpful. They're not a requirement, but they can be helpful. What else do you get to do during this summer in addition to working in a research lab with a mentor on a project? Well, we meet once a week, and you'll actually get to talk to scientists at different career stages, learn about how they got to where they are. You'll learn about all the different kinds of paths they took and where they plan to go next. We'll also talk about how to prepare and give presentations, and you'll also get to do an end of program symposium. If you have questions about applying to college, applying to graduate school, I'm happy to help you with those things as well. The students that come and participate in our internship frequently say things like, I want to work at Janelia for the rest of my life. Everybody has told me that they have an amazing time. Next slide, please. And so we are currently closed. Because of COVID, our labs are not open to the public. We are hoping that they will be open again this summer and that we will be able to have the high school internship. The application process is not currently open. We hope that later this winter we will be able to open it. I can't tell you when that will be, but I want everybody to be prepared for that possibility. And for those of you that are thinking longer term, we definitely hope to be able to have the opportunity to do the internship in another year in 2023. So with that, if you have other questions about the internship or about Janelia, please feel free to contact me at my email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about Janelia, about the internship, or about careers in science in general. Thank you.
All right.
When we apply, is there a specific person we should address the cover letter to? No, that's not necessary. The application doesn't really have a cover letter. The application has a couple of very short essays, and we'll also have some letters of reference from your high school teachers and or people that you've worked with in research. Are applicants without coding background disadvantaged? There are some projects that do not require coding, but many of the projects, because of the nature of not being able to work at the bench, benefit from some coding. But we've had people do computer vision projects that did not require any significant previous coding experience. Where will the application be shared? It will be made available to you through Loudoun County Public Schools. They will have an announcement. They will have the link. It will not be through Janelia or me.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Snap?
If an applicant was more science-based than computer science-based, is this internship for them? That's up for you to decide. I think that we're working on scientific projects even with computation. The computation enables interpretation of some of the data from the bench. There are also experiments that we run through machine learning, as well as trying to identify fly behaviors through computer vision, or even one participant was working in protein chemistry, looking at large databases of proteins. So if you are interested in science in general, I think you could find this extremely exciting, and you're going to be surrounded by people doing bleeding edge science. How many interns are accepted? That depends on the number of labs that want to have high school interns, but we've had anywhere from 5 to 10 each summer. What level of coding should you have to be successful? Is knowing the basics enough, or should you learn more? It doesn't hurt to know more, but I want to emphasize that the key here is that you would at least feel comfortable being able to code, versus I took a Coursera and I've got a little certificate, versus I actually have a GitHub site and I occasionally like to write macros or something like that. If you're comfortable with it, that's great. But again, coding's not required. We're looking for people that are really curious. That's the most fundamental thing that we really want, is people that are actually curious about how to tackle scientific problems, learn about experiments. Are there any courses we should take that would make us more appealing? Well, as I mentioned, I think if you can take statistics, and if you have any computer science course background, and if you could take advanced math or physics, especially calculus, linear algebra. I know that at Academy of Science, there's also opportunities to potentially take machine learning, but it's not required. And again, even just showing some sort of level of creativity. We had a person a couple years ago that was really interested, that their primary focus was actually doing local ecology. And we were very interested in that student, and we made them an offer. Do all interns work on the same project? No, it depends on the lab. One lab hired 4 students one year, and they were working on related projects. But usually students work on very different projects in different labs. Are the interns with previous science internships preferred? We tend to take people that are more senior, people that are juniors or seniors in high school, just because they tend to have a little bit more experience and, of course, more coursework. It's not a requirement. If you have previous science experience, it doesn't hurt. Other questions? Again, I'm happy to talk about it. Is there a preferred GPA? No, actually, we're not one of those people that actually cares so much about your GPA. We're much more interested in your curiosity and your interest in solving problems and learning about science. I think that there's way too much emphasis in the world on GPAs. And once you get in the real world, you'll realize that most places actually don't pay that much attention to GPAs. It's not on your CV or your resume. Other questions? How does the application process?
I'm sorry. I can get involved with the application process here. I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you are interested in applying for this internship, you may click on that link and it will take you to a form that you can fill out, and it will go to the experiential learning office here in Loudoun County. So all applications have to go through the Loudoun County Public Schools.
Okay, so I got 2 questions. How does the application process work to apply, and are essays required? The answer is that yes, there are some essays. They're short. The application consists of a description of any previous research experience and why you want to participate in a summer internship at Janelia. And we also ask for a copy of your resume, which would include coursework and would include any experience that you have coding or doing other kinds of science. We also get 2 letters of reference. And then those applications are all sent to Loudoun County Public Schools, and they then separate out applications that they think would probably have the strongest possibility of being considered. But I still go back and look at all of the applications because I sometimes find some real diamonds in the rough, and we've had some really fun students that didn't necessarily have the highest GPA, but did really cool work anyway. And so then the applications are sent to me. We have group leaders review them. We then identify students that we would like to interview. They come to Janelia for a 15-minute interview. You meet with scientists, and then you also meet separately with me, and I ask you some different kinds of questions, more philosophical. Then we make our final selections, and everybody comes to Janelia in the middle of June and work here through early August. Do you have to be 16 currently to fill out the form? You could fill out the form whenever you want, but the application itself is each year. So if you're not yet 16 and won't be 16 next summer, then there's no point in filling out the form. But next year, when the application call comes from Loudoun County Public Schools, then you could potentially apply. Any other questions? There are interviews, absolutely. You get a chance to come to actually see the research building, and you'll get a chance to meet with some scientists, and you'll also meet with me. And depending on how those interviews go, then we would make an offer. So the interviews are usually in February or early March. When I say next summer, do I mean the summer of 2022 or summer 2023? Next summer is 2022, and that is when we were hoping to have the internship again. Again, we are currently closed to the public because of COVID, but that may change. And if that does change, we will have an application for summer 2022. I anticipate that everything will be more or less back to normal for 2023. And if you are not yet 16, you could apply for 2023 in the fall of 2022. I hope that's clear. And if not, I'll be happy to clarify further.